We're going to get started. Thank you so much for sharing all the motivations, the vision. There's clearly a lot of folks on this webinar who have energy and who know each other, who are meeting each other for the first time. Thank you for being part of our movement family as we enter this webinar today. So hi everyone, my name is Mimi Ho, and welcome to the second of 6 webinars on the topic of transformative movement building. This is a collaboration of the Movement Strategy Center and the Move to End Violence program. My name is Mimi Ho, and I'm the co-director of Movement Strategy Center, and I'll be your MC today. We are very excited to present this series. Movement Strategy Center has been a long-time partner of the Move to End Violence, a program of the Novo Foundation that aims to strengthen leaders, organizations, and the movement as a whole, working to end violence against all girls and women. Over the years of this partnership, we have informed and shaped each other's work. This series is an opportunity to share this work with all of you and anyone that is interested in how to build powerful movements for social change. We hope these webinars will introduce some shared language and concepts and help spark more conversations about the kind of movement we need and how we'll get there. So this is a webinar series. It's the second of a 6-part series. The first one, we introduced core concepts. Today's webinar is on vision and purpose. This series is about transformative movement building. And transformative movements shift the way we think, our structures, our systems, the way we live, and even who we are. Today, we are exploring about how we're having clarity over vision for the world we want, and understanding of our unique role in moving towards that vision can help build transformative movements. Today's objectives are to introduce vision as a crucial element of transformative movement building, to deepen our understanding of the role that vision and purpose it takes to build transformative movements, and to explore how vision and purpose can help us navigate and make choices in times of uncertainty. But first, a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar, and you will be able to request the link on the Move to End Violence website in the next day or so. If you are doing social media, you can use the hashtag Transformative Movements, no spaces. And we've reserved some time for question and answer towards the end, but even throughout the webinar, there are ways for you to participate if you are connected through the webinar platform. In the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a couple of options. Q&A allows you to ask a question directly to the panelists. Throughout the webinar, we will be keeping an eye on this Q&A, and we will also return to these questions during the Q&A part of our webinar at the end. You can also chat. And again, you can say it to everyone, choose to broadcast to everyone, or just to the panelists. You can use this feature to communicate in real time with everyone on the panelists or specific people. And if you're having technical difficulties, send it to the all panelists and we will try to troubleshoot with you. So our agenda today, we are very fortunate to have Joanne Smith of Girls for Gender Equity and Kelly Miller of the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. They will be sharing stories that help illustrate how vision and purpose can play a role in movement building. And they are beloved members of many of your communities on this webinar. First, however, we're going to hear from my dear colleague, Julie Quiroz, out in Michigan, who serves on MSC's leadership team and is a driving force behind MSC's storytelling and narrative work. Julie will give us some context about working with vision and purpose in transformative movement building. Julie.
Thank you so much, Mimi. And I'm so excited to be here today and so excited to imagine.
Julie, you're on mute.
I'm not on mute. Let me see. Try it again. Can you hear me now?
They hear her.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Go ahead, Julie, sorry.
You can hear me now? Okay, great. All right. Thanks again, Mimi, and thank you everyone out there. I'm so excited to be here, and even though I can't see all the faces of everyone out there, I can really hold you in my heart. And I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of vision and purpose, and then super excited to hear Kelly and Joanne talk about really applying it in their movement work. So this whole series is about transformation, and of course, transformation really starts with our own stories. So let me just start with mine. As a kid, I had a sense of purpose, and it was really shaped by movements, and particularly by the civil rights movement. I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, so the civil rights movement was really in the air and really powerful influence. But I wasn't directly connected to movement building in any way, and kind of what I knew from watching it on TV. But it really impacted me to have a sense that there could be a vision of a world different than the one we have. And I felt a sense of purpose inside me as a little girl, a sense of that there was something about liberation that was part of me. And I went from there. I didn't, like I said, have a direct connection to movement building, so I kind of took a pretty traditional path, and I ended up with a job in Washington, D.C., where I thought big change could occur. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that that really wasn't the place for me. It felt to me like in D.C. at the time that the story was really about sort of conforming to the political space that existed. And it didn't really feel like it was about sort of transformation or liberation. And sometimes it didn't feel like it was about change. And it felt like movement building wasn't in partnership with policy. So I was lucky. I got to leave DC quite a bit, and I got to know groups outside of DC, grassroots groups who had a very different vision and a very different story. And the story I was attracted to was of around expanding political space and changing the conditions in which policy occurs. So I finally left DC, and I took a job with a grassroots immigrant rights coalition. And I could feel, even though I didn't have those words at the time, I could feel that purpose that had been inside me since I was a little girl, really aligning more closely with the decisions in my life. And I eventually found my way to Movement Strategy Center. And there was the very first time that I ever had a real conversation about movement and vision. And it affected me very, very deeply. So one good thing about all the work I've gotten to do since I left DC was that I have seen so many wonderful examples of organizations and groups leading with vision, with really incredible vision. And one of my favorite examples is the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Now, NDWA actually puts forth a vision of a caring economy, a vision of an economy where caregiving and love and family are at the center of our economy. Now, if you stop and think about that, that is pretty audacious to say that all the structures and all the assumptions of economics would be flipped in order to support those values. So that's an example to me of leading with vision. And I also know, I've heard their story, that they got to that vision through really listening to the complexities of the lives of their members, of the workers themselves. And the movement was reflecting and looking at the fact that most of the workers both wanted to take on the injustices, the very real injustices that they faced, but they also felt a human connection to the families that they worked for. And that complexity was part of the mix as NDWA began to articulate a vision. And the vision of a caring economy is not only a vision for its members and for workers, but a vision for everyone. And it's not just a vision of what they're against, but a vision of what they're for. So basically our main point, transformative movements require bold vision. It's not an add-on, it's not a luxury, it is at the core of what we need to do in transformative movement building. So we often think of vision as something, or it can feel like vision is something that's sort of far away or outside of us. But really, vision is primarily about taking a set of values that we care about, our deepest values, and putting them at the center of our lives and of our thinking, just as NDWA put the values of caregiving at the center of their vision. So vision isn't necessarily something that's far away. It's something that we can draw on our deep values and transform within ourselves. And the really cool part about that is that the values aren't something that we're going to wait for. We can actually embody them right now in our next action and in our next breath. Vision is also, it's not like utopian, it's really grounded. Vision is grounded in an awareness of the present, of the reality of the present. Again, NDWA was listening to the complexity of of the experience of their workers. Vision is also deeply grounded in past wisdom. Now, we see this all around us, for example, in agriculture. There are indigenous methods of agriculture that the colonist mind had dismissed as ineffective and primitive, which are being revived now, not just because they work, but because they're crucial to our vision for the future. They're crucial to our survival as a sustainable planet. So the image you see here may be familiar to a number of you because it's a picture that was drawn by the first cohort of the MEV movement builders. Mad props to anyone out there who is part of this. And what you see in this picture is that people from all different organizations didn't know each other all across the country, took the time and energy to create a vision both of ending violence, but what were they for? What was the vision that they were moving toward? And they defined this vision of beloved community. So it's a beautiful picture of really centering vision within your processes. And it's also a picture of the sort of very specific purposes, the traces of specific purposes that each person brought to that process. So what do I mean when I say purpose, and how does it connect with vision? Well, one way to think about purpose is just that it's sort of like your personal North Star. It is the guiding motivation that is unique to you. Now, I saw in the chat, many of you immediately answered very quickly things from deep inside of you that were your purpose, the things that you were for. And so you can think about vision as sort of where you're going, where we want to go, and purpose is that compass that helps you make decisions, that helps you navigate along the way towards that vision. There's lots of good examples that help us think about and explore vision and purpose. One, of course, is Harriet Tubman, who we all know had an incredible and shared vision of a world free of slavery. And she also had an incredible sense of purpose around liberation. And one of the first acts of liberation we know of Harriet Tubman was that she liberated herself. She was able to free herself from slavery. And then she went back over and over again to guide so many other people out of slavery. And of course, we know that she used literally the North Star as she did that. Now, her role changed during the Civil War and after the Civil War, but her purpose always remained the same, and her life choices always aligned with that purpose. So purpose it's individual, but it's necessary both for you and for the whole. Each of us having our own deep clarity about our individual purpose helps us as a movement. And it is what allows us to reach impacts that are exponential, that are beyond what we've been able to achieve before. So if you're like me, maybe the first time I had a conversation about purpose, I felt kind of a little bit of performance anxiety, I think, because I thought, well, what if I don't really have it really down perfectly, like it's not totally clear to me. And but what I came to learn was that thinking about purpose is really about just listening to your intuition and listening to your gut, listening to those little voices inside you that you can't really turn off, and allowing them to guide you on paths that might not seem logical, but they feel intuitively correct. And a story that I just love from someone you may all know is Trina Green Brown at MEV, who I had the pleasure of getting to know through the MSc lab processes. And she told us a very deep story about being a mom and how central that was to her purpose in life, but also feeling that as a Black mother of a Black son, she felt like she was often saying no to her son to protect him. And she asked herself the hard question about, am I parenting from fear? And she allowed herself to ask that hard question. And her answer was that she wanted to imagine what it would be like to parent for liberation. And you may know that question resulted in her launching a new project called Parenting for Liberation. And of course, Parenting for Liberation is part of a broader vision, but it also reflects the very personal and specific journey of purpose that Trina took. So I want to pause for a moment and ask you all to, even though you're out there and I can't see you, maybe just think for one moment to yourself, invite you to close your eyes, and without any judgment, without, just whatever pops into your head, ask yourself, what is my purpose? And just whatever pops into your head, even if it doesn't seem to make any sense, just ask yourself, what is my purpose? And what would you like to explore about that in the future? Now, maybe that was a pretty fast reflection, but maybe there's some spark of something that you'd like to look at, that you'd like to think about in the future. So why are we doing an entire webinar on vision and purpose? At a time when the world can seem more overwhelming, more terrifying, more challenging than it's ever felt. We are in a storm, it feels. And the reason why we're spending so much time on it is because we have to. Because the practice of purpose and vision is more important and more necessary than it's ever been. It is crucial to finding a way forward. Now, it's, again, looking back in history, we can find examples that help us and guide us and comfort us. A story that I love came from Norma Wong, who some of you may know, who told us this story. Norma is from Hawaii, and she is with the Institute for Applied Zen. She herself is native Hawaiian descent and Chinese descent. And she told us the story of the Polynesian people finding Hawaii hundreds of years ago. And she told us how the Polynesians, even though they couldn't see beyond the great ocean, had a vision of a world out there that was interconnected. And they had a sense of purpose that was very interesting as well. They believed that there were people out there that they couldn't see who they were connected to. Somewhere out there, they were sort of like long lost relatives, and it was their purpose to go find them. Now, you can imagine being Polynesian and, you know, cooking your food and keeping a roof over your head and being in your familiar world, but having this sense of purpose that's so strong that it propels you to go out into the complete unknown, to go out into the vast open waters of the ocean. And not only are you willing to get on a boat and go, you're willing to spend years in preparation, thinking it through. What kind of food do you need to take on a journey that you don't know how long it's going to be or how far you're going to go? What kind of tools do you need to bring? Who do you need to bring in your boat that can actually make it in that kind of voyage? So we have examples of navigating into the unknown, and they involve vision and purpose. So the question, it feels to me, is what is the vision and the purpose that can motivate each of us and all of us to navigate into the unknown, to find a path where it feels like there's none? Now, finding a path means putting together a vision and finding a purpose, using your inner compass to get there. Finding a way means embodying values right now, not something we wait for, but embodying them in the present. And finding a way means embracing the wisdom of the present, the reality of the present, and also the wisdom of the past. It means seeing what is emergent and what we can celebrate and what we can be joyful about. In the words of Arundhati Roy, another world is not only possible, she's on the way. And on a quiet day, if you listen very carefully, you can hear her breathe. Thank you.
Julie, thank you so much. You are the perfect person to be giving this overview of purpose and vision. And I just have to take a moment. You are someone who practices rigorous vision and purpose in everything you do, from raising your daughter to storytelling and emergent strategy here at the Strategy Center, and as a writer, and also in navigating the various challenges that you have had to face. You are a total inspiration to all of us, so thank you. And next, I would love to introduce another amazing, dynamic woman. I'm going to travel to New York City, and I would like to introduce Joanne. She is the Executive Director of Girls for Gender Equity, an intergenerational organization committed to the physical, psychological, social, and economic development of girls and women, based in New York. So Joanne, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So please describe, you have an amazing vision that for an inclusive racial and gender justice movement. Tell us about it.
Well, first, Julie, thank you for really laying the groundwork for vision. So much of what you said resonates with me, especially when you landed, it's who you're for. And my vision is for a world that values our most vulnerable in our society, especially right now within our racial justice movement of the 21st century, a movement that a vision that values the people who are least considered. And at this time, that is cis and trans and gender nonconforming girls of color, Black girls in particular. A a vision for a world where we can determine that our most vulnerable in our community need to have policy and practice that support their liberation. And that support their liberation as they're, really oftentimes considered last. We borrowed a term when we developed our beloved community vision from Gandhi, that a statement of the last girl. And that's talked about as the last to be considered, the last to be asked or seen or really valued in society. And so my vision is for Black girls to be seen as experts so that we get the best policy and practice, so that the most impacted are the ones naming the change, living the change, and that we are practicing the change, that we're celebrating our girls, so that they're comfortable in their skin, comfortable being themselves, and accepted as the geniuses that they are and valued in society. I think when that happens, our values and moral compass in society will shift.
Thank you, Joanne. You're ringing the sirens over here in Oakland. So thank you so much. And you shared that putting girls of color at the center is a deep part of your vision, that folks at the margin and communities at the margin need to be stepping into the center to govern and lead for the whole.
That's right.
So tell us more about why girls of color at the center.
Well, because when you have, the most, vulnerable and, girls of color are many times unable to vote, right? Unable to, have full-time jobs, dependent on our shift as a society, systemically, institutionally, culturally, and in practice, dependent on us to be seen and be heard and be valued and lifted up, dependent on us to value femininity, and to not see that as weakness, to see that as strength and powerful. And it really speaks to, the need for, us as a society to really shift our moral compass and how it is we practice, especially as we build. Who are we leaving out of the conversation? Who is not at the table? Who is not in the room? And oftentimes it's Black girls, it's Black women, it's people of color. And so we really have to do better as a society for our whole society, because that's where we get the best, culture and practice from. So much of what it is that we, follow culturally, whether it's pop culture or historically, whether it's arts, whether it's education, has been birthed by women of color, has been birthed by Black women and girls. And oftentimes that is erased and made invisible. And so that shift would really shift the paradigm. And I see that vision and future coming.
And, you shared a story with me before about how vision and purpose is not just a destination, but it's actually something that's alive and keeps your girls and you going as you do your work. Can you share a story about how that plays out for you in your work and in your daily life?
Yeah. So many times my mentor, Norma Wong, I'm from the School of Norma Wong, has named, or asked me to name what's the change and what's the transformation. And so much of our work is about change and practice, right? When really it's about the transformation. A few weeks ago, I don't know if folks have heard about Naya Kelly, who is now a graduate of Spring Valley, and she was involved in the assault in Spring Valley, where she stood up for the young woman, the Black girl in the classroom who was being thrown across the classroom by a school resource officer, and she videotaped the encounter, and it went viral. And one of the things that she said was, after getting arrested and released for standing up for this girl, was I had to stand with her because she was all alone. And we were at a press conference and we were having this conversation, and a young person in the room from Brotherhood Sister Soul, she's an Afro-Latina young woman in high school, said, I have to say this or I'll, regret it when I leave here. But I have to say that, I'm just so proud to know you and to be in the room with you. And it feels good to know that there are girls like you in the world and that the world can see us, that society can see that we exist and that we do stand together and with each other. It makes me so proud to know that, you exist, and I would have done the same thing. And it was that moment of, this is what it's about, right? It wasn't a perfect trial. It shouldn't have been arrested. None of the things that she's had to encounter or Shakira have had to encounter should have happened. And through this process of developing the solutions and coming out of the other end and practicing, a new vision for the world, girls are able to stand together, value each other, learn from each other, and love each other through the process. And that's what it's about. That's what the transformation is about. How is it we come together and work together, play together, sometimes fight together, right? But treat each other the way in which we want society to treat us and to treat our girls. And that was a perfect moment that day of that.
Thank you. And yes, you're getting a lot of love from folks on the chat. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah.
So we're going to come back to Joanne during our Q&A. And right now we're going to travel from New York City all the way to beautiful Idaho. I'd love to introduce her sister, Kelly Miller, who is the director of the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. They are a statewide membership organization focused on ending gender violence fueled by multiple systemic oppressions. They are committed to creating compassionate communities with liberation and equity for all human beings. Kind of a small vision.
Thanks, Mimi.
And Kelly, I understand a few years ago that you and the Idaho Coalition really committed yourselves to centering the liberation for the last girl. Tell us about that.
Yes, I mean, it was a very deeply personal journey for me. And I just have to say, I'm so inspired by hearing what Joanne had to say, and Julie and yourself, and just even knowing we were going to have this conversation was super excited. And so when I think about the work that we've done here in Idaho, I mean, it really has started with me and my own transformation that came about from my experience as a cohort member with Move to End Violence. And since then, we really have taken that centering liberation for the last girl, both from my core and into the organization with our entire team here. And for us, that liberation for the last girl, I mean, it's both foundational and really rooted in the lived experiences of marginalized and underserved communities. And it's also aspirational. It's about imagining the unimaginable. And it's what keeps us going. It keeps me going when we're facing opposition or it's tough. Because it gives us such clarity about the work that we want to do. I mean, it's foundational in that it's rooted in a deep understanding in the way that human beings extract domination and violence against one another and whole communities based on identities and characteristics. It's about our learning how society devalues girls and women and people who are gender oppressed, how our society reflects and perpetuates a toxic white supremacy and a national origin, how we really have erased and disregard our history of genocide of Native Americans and the multiple ways we create barriers for individuals with disabilities. So our liberation for the last girl is rooted in that understanding that when one group of people is valued less or valued more, has less or more power based on an identity or characteristic, that we all lose, that none of us are truly free. And so it's that liberation, that freedom from the ways we dominate and extract and cause violence that's so powerful for us. And I think what's so exciting is that what Julie talked about, it's aspirational. It's aspirational because it is imagining the unimaginable. It's proactive rather than reactive. And for many, many decades, our organization was very much a reactive organization. And so we're really now imagining what would it be like if we had compassionate communities with social equity and collective liberation. And for us, the most important piece of that liberation is the last girl, and how Joanne talked about it being conceptual, not an actual last girl, but how every community in Idaho and across this country have last girls, the ones that have any individual population that has least access to resources, that's been pushed out of society and not able to thrive and reach their potential. I mean, the last girl is Brescia Meadows, a 15-year-old in Ohio who's currently incarcerated and facing a charge of aggravated murder for defending her family from abuse. The last girl, a group of 11 and 12-year-olds that I spoke with and listened to deeply earlier this year in juvenile detention, and no one had ever asked them what happened. So here's the thing, until we really found this idea of liberation for the last girl and really centered, our core and our purpose and vision around that, our organization really served predominantly white individuals who were heterosexual, able-bodied, temporarily poor. And that is not who we needed to be reaching in the work that we did. And so because of this deeper understanding of the lived experience of human beings in our community, we had to make this shift. So while it feels also aspirational, it also has just given us a great deal of clarity about the world we need to create.
Thank you, Kelly. And you started to get into this, but can you say just, and I'm going to ask the last question, and we're going to actually open it up to the rest of the folks on the webinar to ask all of our panelists. But for you, Kelly, how did this, you started to get into how it actually changed how you operated as a coalition. Can you say more about the specific ways that you actually, changing your focus to liberation, like for the last girl, really shifted your practices and the way you did things?
Thanks, Mimi. I mean, it's actually changed everything. It's not even just change, it's really transforming everything. I mean, it's not about what we do as an organization, but the changes we want to see in the world. And we're seeing this as such a time of disruption, but also of opportunity. And we really needed to be more strategic and adaptive in the work that we did. And so we actually went through a theory of change process through a Move to End Violence organizational development grant. So we could just take everything that we were feeling and learning and actually put it into a shared common language and a tool that could be a touchstone for all of our decision making. So when we think about operationally, it's continuing to change everything, and we still have so much work to do, but things like shifting resources in our work towards marginalized communities, and that's about prioritizing funding for the LGBTQ community or the Native American communities or Latina communities in Idaho. We also recognize that we needed to be different, that I needed to be a different kind of leader, our organization needed to be different. We need to begin to dismantle hierarchy and structures within our own organization. We needed to integrate physical practice and breathing. We needed to actually raise our own consciousness, particularly around issues around race. And so for those reasons, why we really prioritize really building our own capacity by bringing in folks like Monica Dennis to really help us understand racial liberation and equity. We prioritize conferences now like Race Forward, and we send as many staff that want to go. We read different books like Grace Lee Boggs' The Next American Revolution. We also understand the deep impact of the criminal justice system on communities of color and anti-violence work. And so we're exploring community accountability and Mimi Kim's work. At the same time, we're trying to figure out ways, how can we integrate gender bias and racial bias into the criminal justice systems that we've been working with. And I think the most exciting piece is that we're building a bigger we. I mean, if you start thinking about liberation for the last girl, it was just natural for us to begin to build and strengthen relationships with racial justice community organizations, with economic justice, environmental justice. And so that piece has been just extraordinarily fulfilling. And so when you talk about seeing the world, we can actually begin to see that world, and it really gives us a great deal of hope.
Kelly, thank you. And I love that you're weaving in practices of appreciation and connection with all the wonderful people that you have learned from and are teaching. So thank you, all of you. So we want to open this up right now to questions. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we're going to try to get Julie back up on camera as well. So these questions are for Joanne, Julie, and Kelly. So I'm going to, great, here's a question. So a question is, can you talk more about how you worked on dismantling hierarchy within your organization? And this is open to any of you.
I can jump in just quickly. I mean, because we're a relatively mainstream organization, right? So we had a lot of work to do. So it's things like really looking at our pay scale. We hired, 5-10 years ago, really about professionalization and not lived experience. It's also actually looking how we set ourselves up as an organization. We moved into a new building with a lot of intention to go into open, adaptable space, and saw that having offices with doors was actually creating a hierarchy and also a siloing. So looking at all of our personnel policies, the holidays, how we actually structure the workday. I mean, pretty much everything comes under that lens of really trying to dismantle the hierarchy within the organization.
Sure. And at Girls for Gender Equity, I mean, one of the things we focus on is intergenerational leadership. Just recently, we brought on 4 young women, 25 and under, to lead the Young Women's Advisory Council from the Young Women's Initiative that we launched here in New York City. And that's really, you know, when they outnumber you especially, that's really been a practice of, you know, leading from behind and leading together and learning from each other. It's a practice that we've practiced programmatically, but on staff, you know, it's a practice that, you know, we're still figuring out. I'm the executive director and the founder. There's not co-directors here. I'm a Black woman, and so much of the oppression that so many of us face, I mean, I walk in face as well. I could have an intern who has, you know, more wealth than me, but never even get paid from GGE because she can afford her parents have a home for her or a savings for her in a way that I don't have set up. And so we talk about that, you know, we talk about layers of oppression and it not being about positionality as much as about where you truly are in society and what it is you need. One of our young people needs to work from home most of the time because she has a daughter. And so we figure it out and, you know, we fail forward practicing and trying.
Thank you. Here's another question. How do you deal with situations where a lot of people in an organization have not listened deeply enough to be able to see the vision that you see?
Joe, do you want to take that one or you want me to jump in?
I think that's you.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, some of it's been really hard. I mean, this has been really hard. I would say lumpy waters at times. But the thing that actually can the through line for this, and Julie talked about that, is really having clarity around your purpose and your vision will get you through that. I mean, we've had some really intense and deep conversations within our organization and our team. And so it's really about being real and authentic and showing up in really responsible ways. It's also about deep listening, learning new practices. For me, I mean, I had to make a shift. I used to take up way too much space. I didn't have good listening skills. And so just being really recognizing the areas, our learning edges where we needed to grow and learn, and then creating a space for that to happen.
So I have a question for Joanne. As a woman of color who just recently has taken the national stage by storm and was invited to speak at the White House, you are taking up a lot more space. Tell us about what it's like to jump into the center and lead for the whole.
Ooh, did I say fell forward? I mean, you know, you figure it out. You know, you think at every stage that, you know, you've arrived somewhere and then realize, oh, this is the first time I'm at this age and this stage. And so I've had to be very gracious with myself and remain grounded. I'm so thankful to have community and to be rooted in community and be accountable to community. Because I can see how very easily, if you don't have a home base, and you are leading national work or, you know, being brought in to speak on national work, how you can get lost in what you think is needed as opposed to checking back in and asking what is needed and being clear that, you know, when you're speaking for yourself and when you're speaking for the whole. And so that accountability has been critical. Every day I wake up and I have to recommit to my purpose. Every day it's work. To be clear about where it is my motives are coming from and why, right? To move the ego aside and to try to be what's needed and wanted. It's humbling, it's a practice, and it's something that, you know, I always hope that I am serving and doing justice for and with community. I'm not here to save anyone. I'm here to work with people And I see this movement as lifelong and this work as lifelong, and I'm part of that work. I'm here because I am the work. And so that's how I attempt everything. And sometimes, you know, I do better than others, but it's been quite a year.
Great. Thank you both so much for modeling humility and bigness at the same time and being in community with your folks.
Thank you.
So a question that's been posed is, what is your relationship or the movement's relationship to law enforcement and other hierarchical systems?
Julie, you want to take that one?
No, I think the things that folks have struggled with in the move to end violence would probably be the most instructive here, actually.
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to go, or do you want me to jump in?
Why don't you start us off?
Okay. Gosh, and I'm saying this with a lot of thought. For those that are listening in, know that I used to be a prosecutor years ago. And even then, I could clearly see the impact of the criminal justice system on women of color. I think of Vanessa, a young Black woman who had a developmental disability, who was raped by her father, and the system completely failed her. It broke her. And I think Gresham Meadows now in Ohio. And so this is such a critical moment in time where we have to really be thinking about what do we need to create to take the place of a system that has created so much harm in our country. And so it's about really, this is when Julie talks about going into the unknown, this is the unknown. And we have to begin to really imagine things that we cannot begin to imagine, and it's going to take all of us. What are the community accountability solutions that are out there? What I know is we can't have a vacuum. But while we can continue to put pressure on the criminal justice and other systems around, the intrinsic biases that are creating the deaths of Black and cis transgender women and men, we have to begin to imagine and really start creating other options now. These are really deep conversations that are happening across the country. Many state coalitions are taking a stance of not creating new crimes and really, really reflecting on the harm that's been done.
Yeah, but I knew you would really cover it beautifully. And, what I'll just add is that, the way in which we've worked over the last 20, 30 years within the domestic violence field, within the field to end gender-based violence, has been carceral. Every solution has been law enforcement that has criminalized Black communities, criminalized communities of color, communities that already are disenfranchised and are feeling and continuing to have to deal with and recover from this over-criminalization, to the point where within our educational system, here in New York City, we have the 5th largest police district in our school systems. And so then we have rates of high levels of suspension and expulsions of communities of color, girls of color, boys of color. We have scanners in schools, so that is preparing young people for prison. We have prisons that are being built based on 3rd grade reading level within communities. And so we have to, with the criminal justice system, has to be reimagined. The institution itself is inherently racist and inherently sexist, and it has to really be addressed as an overall institution. In so many places when criminalization, didn't need to be the answer, it was, and we needed restorative justice and transformational practice. And so that needs to start within the criminal justice system, as a system, as a whole. As Kelly named, the reimagining and the practicing, right, on how we do that. It's happened in some communities, but has to happen more and has to happen internally. And I have to name it because it starts with admitting it. If we're not admitting the problem, then we're never going to get to the root of the problem.
Thank you. The questions, they're fantastic questions. We won't get to all of them, but people are clearly wanting to make this applied in their own work and in their organization. So question for Joanne, what are strategies for building your staff so that they can feel they can create space for engaging in difficult conversations? and also about positionality and privilege. And how do you meet people's needs, especially if they're not in formal decision-making roles?
That's a lot of questions. I'll try. So I'll start with building the staff and cultivating a team. We're an organization that has tried many different models. We have, a practice of working with interns and Master's of Social Work interns for the year, bringing in young staff to work with young people, also working with teachers in schools because we run after-school programs, and then also hiring back alum who have been with us for years and may have graduated from the program, but wanting to keep that consistency and work going, especially as we build campaigns. And so within each model, it's different. We've tried variations of bringing back alum and realized as a full-time process, we need an alumni program so that gap between being a young person in the program and then being a full-time, accountable employee of the organization is filled, and they have mentorship along that route. And that's something that we learn through practice. Within our staff, we have, of course, staff meetings. We come together. We're a small team. At this point, we're 8, and that's the largest, full-time our staff has been. We'll be 11 by the end of the year. That's the largest full-time staff we've had. We have 10 part-time staff members. And so we do professional development. We have community conversations around what is happening, but just pretty authentic around what is happening, one, in the world and then in each other's lives, and make room for those kind of conversations through staff meeting and professional development, and also just hanging out together. On October 6th, we'll have a community dinner here at GGE, and people will come by and we'll talk about intergenerationally Free Brescia and what's going on with that case. And so we create those kind of community spaces for our girls to come back and have those conversations, and that's where a lot of the development happens. We then also intentionally, develop senior staff. I have one staff member who's been with me 6 years. And as the programs and organization evolves and grows, she's key within theory of change practice and within decision-making practice on helping to make those decisions and to lead those practices, and expected as senior staff to do that. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. It's a little bit of everything, especially determining what is needed based on who it is that we're talking about within the staff.
Thank you, Joanne. And we're going to do a quick lightning round for you guys to close, but how can a group develop vision and purpose for their group or organization, and that relates to individual visions of purposes? So we only have 1 minute, so just a flash from all of you.
I say start with your core values. Why are you here? Why did you come? What is your purpose on earth as a person? What do you feel like that is? Even if you're not 100% right, you're in the ballpark, and name it. Just start naming it.
We do the same thing, and we often use the question, what gives you energy? What is the thing that calls you because it just gives you energy and you want to do it? And really starting from, where do people feel energy, and how does that, and how do the different ways that people feel energy add up to something more, and what does that look like as a collective? But definitely starting with people, what draws you, what motivates you, what grabs you. And let me just say one more thing too, is that it's just got to be ongoing. It's a daily thing. It's not like, oh, you go have a staff retreat for 2 days once a year and you're going to have vision and purpose. Like, vision and purpose has to be something that's embedded in every day of what you're doing and all your work all the time. It needs to be part of what you're doing every day.
And from my standpoint, I would say we spent 6 months in a really intensive process. So having the spaciousness to really think big and bold, and really, when you're thinking about creating this vision and purpose for an organization, you want to bring together the people that are ready, willing, and open, that have an appetite for risk-taking. And so you can really, come up with the boldest vision and purpose you could possibly have.
Thank you, all 3 of you. You all 3 are amazing, dynamic women who live and breathe vision and purpose and are making big change in the world at the same time. So thank you, Joanne, Julie, and Kelly. We are just about at the end of our time together. The question there about how to bring that into your work, I want to point everyone that every single one of our webinars in this series has a practice guide, very practical exercises and advice about how you can bring this into your work, into your life. And so please go to the Move to End Violence's website to find their resources. The one for this guide, the guide for this webinar is one on visioning, big vision. And we really appreciate your time. This is the second of 6 webinars on transformative movement building. Again, this is presented by Movement Strategy Center and the Move to End Violence. So today's was on vision and purpose, and the next one, you can see on your screen soon, is one on October 25th on deep embodiment through practice. Kelly and Joanne and Julie all talked about breathing and literally physically grounding ourselves so that we can actually be the people and bring all of ourselves, not just our heads, but our hearts, our minds, our bodies. A lot of that is left out. That is going to be Tuesday, October 25th. Again, this has been recorded and a link will be emailed to registrants, and you can go to the Move to End Violence's website to request the link and download the guides. Finally, we would love to hear your feedback so that we can learn and improve upon these webinars. We have a short feedback form that you can access in the chat box, and it will also be coming to you by email. Again, thank you all so much for your amazing questions, the community that we're creating across the internet and across the country and around the world. Thank you so much for building beloved community with us. And again, thank you for our speakers and to all of you. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thank you.